Good evening, my friends. My name is Rabbi Yitzchok Tiechtel with Chabad of Nashville, and welcome to another edition of Parsha Perspectives. Parsha Perspectives is a lesson and an insight into the weekly Torah portion and the Jewish calendar, based on the teachings of Chassidus and Jewish mysticism. Each week, we come together and we learn about a message that is related to our own personal journey to live a life filled with meaning and purpose. Friends, tonight is Rosh Chodesh Av. It is the beginning of the month of Menachem Av on the Jewish calendar. Tonight begins a period of 9 days of mourning, which will conclude with the 9th day being Tisha B'Av, a day which commemorates the destruction of the first and second Holy Temple that stood in Jerusalem over 1900 years ago. Friends, this Holy Temple was an edifice where God's presence dwelt within. It was the holiest physical place in the world for the Jewish people. 1900 years later, give or take, even though the temple was destroyed, the land that it stood on, which is called the Temple Mount, is still considered a holy and sacred place by the Jewish people until today. So now, you may ask, wow, such a holy temple? What brought about the destruction of this temple? If that was the holiest place on earth, why was it destroyed? What happened? There's a story told in the Talmud Gittin, page 55b, where it says Jerusalem was destroyed on the account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. The story is there was a Jew who had a friend called Kamsa and an enemy called Bar Kamsa. One day, this Jewish man threw a very big party and he sent his servant to invite Kamsa, but by mistake, the servant invited Bar Kamsa. So now Bar Kamsa comes to this party and the host was not impressed. Like, "You're my enemy," he said. "What are you doing here? Get up and leave the party right now." Deeply shaken, Bar Kamsa pleaded with the man. He said, "Can you please reconsider?" He said, "Look, I'm here already. Let me stay here and I will cover the cost of my portion for food and drink." But the owner had such a hatred for this Bar Kamsa. He said, "Leave right now." And Bar Kamsa was getting so embarrassed. He said, "I'll pay for half of the entire party. Let me stay here." Bar Kamsa really got mad and he says, "Leave now or I'll throw you out." The owner says to him that. So Bar Kamsa offers to pay for the entire party. He said, "Just don't embarrass me like this." The host grabbed Bar Kamsa by the hand and he forcibly escorted him from the hall. Bar Kamsa was so hurt. How could this happen? He said there were so many sages in the room, holy people, and nobody protested. So I'm going to go to the Roman government and I'm going to report slander against the Jewish people. He travels to Rome and he made up a story about the Jewish people. And he said, "Roman Emperor, the Jews are rebelling against you. And I want to prove it." He said, "Test them by sending them a sacrifice to be brought on their holy temple on the government of Rome's behalf. And you will see that they will refuse to accept this offering." The emperor sends Bar Kamsa back with a choice of beautiful calf for the temple for an offering. But on the way, Bar Kamsa slyly makes a blemish on the calf's upper lip, and which that would make it unfit for the altar. And then when he comes to the sages, he says, "The Roman emperor sent me to take this as an offering," and the sages refused because they said it's a blemished calf. And the Roman emperor got so mad, he said, "I'm going to destroy Jerusalem." Two questions come up about this story. First of all, why did the host hate Bar Kamsa so fiercely that he, think about it. No money in the world was going to change his mind because Bar Kamsa offered to pay for the whole party. And we know it cost a lot to make a bar mitzvah or a wedding or anything else like that. So while the guests were enjoying themselves, the host might be thinking, wow, this is going to be a big expensive party. How am I going to pay for it? And here, Bar Kamsa says, I'll pay for the whole party. And the host refuses. I mean, what kind of hatred did he have for him? I mean, even if he really disliked him, he could have at least taken the money and let the man stay there. I mean, they could have continued the fight after the party. What was the real reason the host didn't want him to stay? And secondly, when the sages, the holy men, witnessed this whole episode, this unfolding before their eyes, seeing a Jew being mortified in this fashion, why did they remain silent? Not only why, how could they remain silent? Very, very bothersome. Friends, we find the key to the puzzling story in a remarkable letter that the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, wrote that sheds light on just what happened during those turbulent days in Jerusalem so many years ago, with a timeless message for all of us. The Alter Rebbe's letter goes back to the early days of the Hasidic movement. And back then, there were opponents of Hasidim called the Misnagdim, and they waged a bitter campaign against the Hasidim and their movement. And they boycotted them, they harassed them, and they made the lives of the Hasidim unbearable in any way they can. It got to the point where some of the younger Hasidim in the city of Vilna, where the Misnagdim were, felt, you know what? Time to fight back. And they even managed to convince a famous Chassid called Rabbi Moshe Meislish, who was usually known as a fairly moderate man. And they said, Rabbi Moshe, these people are fighting us. We need to retaliate. But in a letter addressed to Rabbi Moshe, the Alter Rebbe, the holy sage, the man, the founder of Chabad, he warned against this course of action. And he wrote, it is my request and my wish to awaken a spirit of purity in his pure heart, to overcome his emotions, because peace never results from a quarrel, God forbid, and especially from a quarrel for the sake of heaven. And indeed, he said, most of the troubles and tribulations stem from arguments and disputes that people say are for the sake of heaven. What troubles and tribulations? What disputes for the sake of heaven is the Alter Rebbe referring to? Seemingly, the opposite is true. The greatest trouble and tribulation of all, the destruction of the temple, resulting in an exile that has lasted close to 2,000 years, was not a product of a dispute for the sake of heaven. It was a product, an outcome of baseless hatred, found in the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Because whatever their dispute was, it appears to have been an ego thing. It appears to have been a personal vendetta, not a dispute for the sake of heaven, a holy dispute. So friends, let me share with you another take on the story. It was offered by a famous scholar called Reb Moshe Sofer, known to many as the Chassam Sofer, and he was the head of the famed yeshiva in Pressburg, known today as Bratislava. And he shared a fascinating angle on the story, which illuminates the whole way we look at the story, such that our questions on the story are resolved. And then the Alter Rebbe's words make perfect sense. The Chassam Sofer tells us, who was Bar Kamsa? He says, Bar Kamsa was a sinner who rejected publicly faith in God. He was a rabble-rouser looking to mock Judaism and those that follow in its path. In other words, he was the sort of person that God-fearing Jews would have every reason to keep away from. And that's why the host was so loath to have him at his party. I mean, this wasn't a petty fight between two people who had polar opposites personalities and couldn't stand each other. This wasn't a business falling out or a dispute between neighbors about noise levels or blocked driveways or unmowed lawns, etc. Friends, the host in this story, he meant well. He wanted to protect the honor of the sages and the sensitivities of his religious observant guests by removing from their midst a known provocator. He refused the money. You know why? Because he believed that he is standing for what's right. He felt taking the money to pay for the party from Bar Kamsa would have meant selling out his Torah values, selling himself for a few dollars. And for the same reason, the sages remained silent, because they approved of the host's righteous indignation and zeal. And presumably, had the host not thrown Bar Kamsa from the party, maybe they would have done it themselves to protect the honor and the dignity of Torah and of God. So the lesson from this story takes on a whole new meaning when you hear what the Chassam Sofer teaches. When we say that Jerusalem was destroyed on the account of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and we talk about how important it is to avoid repeating the story, God forbid, friends, it doesn't just mean not to be obnoxious and exclude people from our celebrations, because that much is obvious. There's a much deeper message here. The sages are telling us to avoid the trap of this kind of righteous hatred in the name of the Torah, in the name of God. True, the Torah does say, don't be associated with the wicked. Also true, that we must denounce all that is evil and all that is wrong, and not just look the other way to avoid, to rock the boat. However, and it is indeed a crucial however, even when it's necessary to rock the boat and call out the wrongdoing, we must remember that we're dealing with another human being, another Jewish person. Because the fight is not personal about adhering to the Torah. Because the sole aim must always be to try and draw the wrongdoer back into the fold. Because there is zero room for just casting someone away like that. Chassidus says that it's our duty to engage them and engage them again and again. And if we fail to do so, if God forbid, the dispute for the sake of heaven gets to the point where one cannot find it in his heart to at least sit at the same table with another, that is a broken day for the Jewish people indeed. And it's so broken that it causes the breaking of the very temple that represents oneness. If you open up the book of the Tanya, the Alter Rebbe explains in chapter 32, and he says, even if another Jewish person's behavior is utterly evil, even if one violated the entire Torah, God forbid, at that moment that we must despise his deeds, yet we must love him for who he is deep down. Because a man is much more than his behavior. Because deep within every Jew lies a neshama, lies a soul. It's an actual portion of Hashem's on high. Which means that no matter what mistake one makes, one has a spiritual responsibility to look at the potential and goodness and holiness of that person that looks evil from the day they were born. Because as much as we hate wickedness, we must love even more that spark, the neshama, the spark that is pure and inevitably will light up one day. I want to share with you a story. Actually, I'll share with you two stories to illustrate this point. There's a famous Jewish singer. His name is Shlomo Carlebach, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach. He was a student in a Chabad yeshiva when he was in New York many years ago, in the 50s. And he would also go out on behalf of the Rabbi to college campuses between 1951 and 54. Yet over time, he left the Chabad movement. And he went around like he's the singing rabbi, and he used to sing songs and tell stories and spread Judaism. But unfortunately, sometimes he used methods that were, you can say, beyond the accepted bounds of halacha of Jewish law. Okay. This man, Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, once visited Australia. He went for a concert tour. The head rabbi of Australia at that point, the head of Chabad rabbi, his name was Rabbi Yitzchok David Groner. And he personally knew Rabbi Shlomo when he was a student with him in yeshiva. But Rabbi Groner received instructions from the Chabad headquarters not to invite Rabbi Shlomo to perform at Chabad institutions because he doesn't follow always the ways of Jewish law. A few weeks later, Rabbi Groner receives a call from the Rebbe's secretary, Rabbi Chadakov, from New York, and says, "No. So how was Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach's visit to Australia?" Rabbi Groner protested. He said, I was instructed by the office in New York not to invite Rabbi Shlomo. Rabbi Chadakov replied, listen to this. He says, you were told not to formally invite him to a Chabad institution, but as a personal acquaintance. You should have invited him to your home for a cup of tea. Because it wasn't about his actions, it was about him seeing that spark within him. Another story that illustrates this point so clearly. There was a man called Chaim Cohen. He was a politician. He served as the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General in Israel. And eventually, he was a justice on the Supreme Court of Israel. Now, in his youth, this man Chaim studied in a yeshiva. He was actually a chazan, a cantor in a very religious community called Mea Sha'arim. But unfortunately, as he got older, he veered from the conventional path of Jewish observance. And throughout his career, he took on various positions that were contrary to Jewish law. And his relationship with the religious community became a bit strained. Especially, he was a powerful person and tried to make issues for the religious community. During the high holidays of 1975, this man, Chaim Cohen, was visiting a friend in New York. And he said, you know what? Tonight is Simchas Torah, happy holiday. Why don't we go with the delegation of the Israeli consulate in Manhattan to visit 770, the Chabad World Headquarters on Simchas Torah? They came to a synagogue packed with thousands and thousands of people waiting in anticipation for the joy and the ceremony of dancing with the Torah to begin. Now, the Gabaim, which means the assistants in the synagogue, would always honor different people with holding Torahs as they danced. And they wanted to give one to the Israeli delegation because they represented the Israeli consulate and the Israeli government, and honor them with holding the Torah on Simchas Torah and dance with the Torah. But then they saw Chaim Cohen there. He was a man that fought the religious community. He went against Jewish law, and they had a dilemma. Could they honor this man like Chaim Cohen, who seemingly he looked for every opportunity to show disdain for Jewish tradition and the very Torah that was being celebrated? The Rabbi was standing on his platform, and he was observing the hesitation of the assistants who didn't want to give Chaim Cohen the Torah. And he brushed aside their concerns, and he said, if Chaim Cohen is here and he wants to honor the Torah, how could we refuse? Friends, Chaim Cohen was given a Torah scroll, which he held so tightly in the middle of the room as thousands of people were singing, and the Rebbe encouraged exuberant singing and dancing. And not for 5 minutes, or not for 10 minutes, for a full 45 minutes, Chaim Cohen held on to the Torah and dancing with joy, and the Rebbe looked at him intently the entire time. Now, friends, after this event, Chaim Cohen didn't change his legal philosophy or his public opinions. But listen, many years later, when another Israeli official who was living in Manhattan was invited to come for another Simchas Torah to 770 to the Rebbe, he said, look, my friend Chaim Cohen, he went one year, and I saw how deeply it affected him and changed his personal opinion on a number of issues. And he said, you know, I'm comfortable where I am right now. I don't want to experience that. See, the Rebbe saw the potential, the goodness that's within a man, and that's how that man was changed. Now you may ask, okay, how could I see the good in everyone? How could we believe that a person is greater than their mistakes? How is it possible to fulfill the mitzvah of love your fellow like yourself? We explained in the past that the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, discussed this matter in a mimer called Mitzvahs Avas Yisrael, and he said, you must love another Jew like yourself, and the way one loves himself is unique. For in our pervasive self-love, we do anything to convince ourselves that we're not bad. As King Solomon says in the book of Proverbs, Ahava mechasa, which means love covers all sin, especially when it comes to our own sins. To a certain degree, friend, we're all narcissists. Because narcissism really works in 3 stages. First, a person experiences self-loathing and having acted wrongly. He feels bad. And then he has like an internal whitewashing of the story. And finally, when the whitewashing is over, a person arrives at the 3rd stage where he concludes, you know what? I was never the aggressor. I was actually the victim. For example, imagine, I'm not saying this story up here, but imagine a man comes home from a long day of work and all he really wants is a plate of chicken and rice and some salad waiting for him when he comes home. Unfortunately, his wife's very tired today. She didn't cook. No rice, no chicken, no salad. There was nothing ready for dinner. It's late at night. The stores are closed. He opens the fridge. It's completely empty. And the man faces a reality. He is going to go to sleep hungry tonight. And he unleashes his disappointment on the easiest target. Who is that? His poor wife. A few minutes pass. And he starts feeling bad. And he starts saying, did she really deserve to be attacked like that? I mean, after all, she was home alone all day taking care of the house. What was I thinking? What kind of terrible person am I? Now, this self-loathing goes on for about a minute, 2 minutes, and then the second stage arrives. And he says to himself, you know what? I'm not that bad, he tells himself. You know what? I worked all day to pay the bills. Could I be faulted for being upset that there was nothing to eat? I mean, would anyone else respond differently? And he's thinking this. And now, this person is starting to feel better about himself after what he did. And then he comes to the third stage. And he goes, huh? Why did my wife even get offended to begin with? I mean, doesn't my wife realize how hard I worked and how hungry I was? I mean, how could she? And here, my friend, at that moment, is when the mitzvah of love your fellow man, like yourself, comes into play. We need to use this self-test. Judge another person with the same love you employ when you judge yourself. Because when I hurt someone else, because I love myself, I will bend over backward to justify myself. So why? So that I can live with myself. So the key is to extend the same courtesy. When someone else hurts me, I must ask myself, what would I tell myself if I was in that person's shoes? Because we need to look at the entirety of the circumstance and understand all the factors that lead people to do what they do. And I must ask myself, how would I want others to view the situation if I was the one doing the hurting? And suddenly, I would arrive at a new perspective, one of forgiveness, one of understanding, and that when all is said and done, the other guy had a bad day, and his behavior doesn't reflect who he really is. He's still valuable. He's still worthy of my love. As the famous sage in the Talmud, Hillel, said, do not do unto others what is hateful to you. And there are few things that we hate more than being judged unfavorably, without being given the benefit of the doubt or being viewed as part of the big picture. Friends, the message of the story of Bar Kamsa is as relevant today as it ever was. This is the time for each and every one of us to get up and say, stop to all the hatred out there. Yes, we may have different opinions. Some people advocate for things that are truly harmful or contradict Jewish values. But we must never stop to love each other and remember that far more unites us than divides us. We must avoid the trap of righteous hatred, which is no more than a ploy of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination. And when we can look beneath the surface, we can find true unity. And together we can overcome every challenge. I want to conclude today with a remarkable story that was actually featured on the Israeli TV program, which they have there called Uvda. The story tells about a typical evening for the Chabad rabbi in Budapest, Rabbi Shlomo Kovs, who was getting ready to go home after giving a nightly class, his own Parsha Perspective, and he receives a text. And the text says, "Hi, this is Kasanad Segedi, and I want to meet you." Rabbi Kovs was shocked. Segedi? You know who he was? He was a high-ranking leader of the Jobbik party. It was a neo-Nazi party in Budapest known for its rabid anti-Semitism. As a child, this Szigeti would sell t-shirts with swastikas, and he later founded the Hungarian Guard. It was basically an outlawed militia that was threatening minorities across the country. And they would arrange marches where Israeli flags were torched, and they would chant, "Go back to Auschwitz." In short, this guy, Szigeti, was a man you don't want to meet in a dark alley. And now, Chassidus Szigeti wanted to talk to a rabbi. So Rabbi Kovs, who's the Chabad Shliach in Budapest, rabbi of the big synagogue there, he agrees to meet him and he invites Szigeti to his home. The man arrives looking rather confused. The rabbi thought, what's going on? This doesn't look right. And Szigeti explained that he had rivals in his anti-Semitic party, and they found the ultimate dirt on him. And they said that his grandmother, his mother's mother, was Jewish, and that she was a survivor of Auschwitz. And his grandmother for decades was trying to hide her past, but the secret was out. This Szigeti, who was an anti-Semite, was 100% Jewish himself. Now Szigeti was in shock, because he wanted to understand what is a Jew and what does it mean to be Jewish, and why now he's suddenly at risk of losing his entire ascending career just because of his grandmother. So Rabbi Kovs explains that according to Jewish law, Judaism passes through matrilineal, it goes through the mother. And Szigeti at that point came to the terms with the fact that things would no longer be the same for him. And sure enough, he had to resign from the party, and he embarked on a journey of self-discovery. The story doesn't end. A few weeks later, he comes and meets with a rabbi, and he says, if I'm Jewish, I want to join the Jewish community. Friends, Rabbi Kovs was speechless. Could he accept a person who just weeks ago spewed vile anti-Semitism, who tried to turn Hungary into a powder keg of hatred? And the issue became such a heated debate. Many of the elderly Jews in the Holocaust, survivors who were afraid to walk in the street due to Szigeti's hateful rhetoric, now were horrified to the idea of this guy's going to sit next to me in services on Shabbat. Everything should be forgiven just because he decided overnight to become a nice guy. And the rabbi was at a loss. So he went to another rabbi called Rabbi Oberlander, who was the chief Chabad rabbi of Hungary, and he was the head of the rabbinical court, to talk to him about this matter. And I personally can tell you, was in Hungary and heard about this story from Rabbi Oberlander himself. And he told me, Rabbi Oberlander, that he struggled to reach a decision. What's the right thing to do? He looked into several halachic works, and he was still unsure what to do. And then he remembered something that he once heard from the Rebbe. And Rabbi Oberlander tells me that the Rebbe told the following story that happened many years before. And he said as follows, that the Maggid of Mezrich, a student of the Baal Shem Tov, once called his student Rabbi Elimelech, and he said, Elimelech, you hear what they're saying in heaven? They're saying in heaven that love for a fellow Jew means to love a complete wicked Rasha, just like you love a complete tzaddik. It occurred to Rabbi Oberlander. He said, can I apply that to Szigeti? For anyone, this applies to him more than anyone. He is a wicked man who wants to do tshuva. And it was decided at that point to put aside Szigeti's past and give him a chance to turn a new leaf. And this man, Szigeti, became a Baal Tshuva, an active member of the Jewish community who avidly combats anti-Semitism by sharing his story around the world. And today there's a movie called Keep Quiet about his story. And friends, back in 2014, I, together with Esther, had the opportunity to meet Szigeti when we visited Budapest. And we heard the story from the man himself. He shared his struggles and how he was embraced by the Jewish community. And today, friends, he is a different man. May we succeed, friends, at fulfilling the mitzvah of love your fellow as yourself, even when it's hard. Because this is precisely what will uproot this baseless hatred that resulted in the destruction of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem 1900 years ago. And very soon, may the Beis Hamikdash, the third Holy Temple, the final edifice, be rebuilt on the foundation of true Jewish unity. With the coming of Mashiach, may it happen speedily in our days. Let us say, Amen.